So I get the job at the end to speak about the future. And I think when I started putting this presentation together, I was reflecting on the presentations that we were going to have before, and thinking about, well, what it is about the communities of the Ouse Washes and the people that have been involved through history. And actually today hasn't disappointed in all I've heard and about the people, the leadership, the amazing ideas they've had, but how they have actually linked to the landscape. Because actually our cultural landscape, and this is why the Ouse Washes is so important, why we started this project, is about people and how they interact with nature and how they manage that landscape. Some traditions have been lost, not all. We've just heard about the skating. Older communities have changed, and we've had dispersal of communities. But we use the word change, and I'm not actually sure if it has changed, because we adapt. The communities have adapted to manage in today's society. And what I'm going to go on to speak about, let's just get this working, is our communities. These are wonderful village signs that have been put together largely by voluntary effort in communities. And what experience shows us is that people do better when they live in strong and supportive communities, and that place really matters to them, whether it's the open landscape, whether it's the village. This matters, and I think through the work we've done with the Ouse Washes, this has really adequately been demonstrated, and that the impact on community engagement for using the landscape is a great approach. We're hoping at the end, and I think Liz has been waving those papers, that people feel in to see and to say how they feel more connected, or if they don't feel connected with that landscape. But subsequently, it's really much about the neighbourhood. And this is a neighbourhood where we know communities face challenges. There is still lacking community cohesion. We heard of the good work of the Rosmini Centre and the project there, fantastic project that has engaged all types of communities in the work. We know in the top of the Ouse Washes there's higher than average child poverty, and there's persistent levels of intergenerational unemployment. There's also failing attainment in schools and housing instability, with lack of affording housing and rising house prices. So what we do know is that deprivation is still within the Ouse Washes area, and some communities will find it hard to act and adapt to what might be loss of services, but others, and I think we've seen some wonderful examples of people and communities, do respond and come together themselves to challenge things and to set up organisations and routes to engage in community life. I've asked to talk about the future, and definitely the future sees further what we call, the buzzword for this is place-based approaches. And this is really being driven at the moment by government policy. You've all heard of devolution. We're going to maybe have a local elected mayor. And there's also something called double devolution, where communities are being asked to take on more services and more for leisure and for social services. We have seen communities starting to do this. They have been starting to set up village pubs, shops, community-led enterprise, but others are having difficulty mobilising themselves so effectively. And much of this work is based around who is present in that community at that time, who is the leader. In the work we do at Cambridgeshire ACRE, it's always usually one or two people. Sometimes I think it's just good they come together and move into that community at the right time. They spark each other off, they provide that leadership, and then that community goes forward, they get others involved. But some communities don't have that, or go for a cycle of not having that. So we really feel that to respond, one of the things, and I think this has been, again, really demonstrated by the Ouse Washes, is to bring different societies and different people together to share ideas, skills, knowledge and leadership. little bit of history. Actually, Cambridgeshire ACRE was the Rural Community Council for Cambridgeshire when it was formed, and we have a really good archive actually, and a great deal of that tells us the social history of communities and why they're like they are today. We heard earlier about agricultural depressions, declines, booms, and in the countryside, we know after the First War, the government surveyed the area, and they were disgraceful housing conditions, really disgraceful in our countryside. And our records show that disgrace. Also, people that own the large estates were moving away, and so the general man on the street, if you like, had to take on the responsibility for the rural community. And it was in 1922 that Henry Morris met with colleagues at King's College in Cambridge to discuss support for Cambridgeshire communities and the best way to succeed. There were very similar concerns actually to what we have today, and this makes sense what we've been doing all these years really, but there's similar concerns. Young people leaving rural areas for the excitement of urban life, and much lower wages and much higher wages in the cities to in the countryside. There was also a great concern about the lack of leisure opportunities, and that was also cited as a major reason why workers were leaving the countryside. A solution was to promote and provide education, and that was all thought to alleviate poverty. And there was also a solution to create an ethos of self-help. And that's not really new to what we're doing today. I think we've seen a huge ethos of self-help through the programmes we've had presented and through our experience of managing this project. They very much cited that the whole community should shoulder the responsibility for rural life and that they needed support doing that. And actually, those of you that know Cambridgeshire ACRE today, that's very much still our vision and our mission to help communities. We facilitate the programmes and then enable the people to shoulder the responsibility for rural life. The first initiatives were community transport, with the bus withdrawal at the moment, we might need that again, but surveys of craftsmen and grants to build village halls and support for cooperatives. One of the most important elements of a community and vital, and this one is actually a community meeting place, as is village halls. And actually, without the village halls across all of the area we deliver our work, we wouldn't be able to undertake what we have done. A lot of the Ouse Fest was held in villages which used village halls. So they are still vitally important, and we have a very good network of about 98% of parishes having village halls or some sort of meeting place. They're still the centre for social activities, sports, arts and recreation. What people sometimes forget is that these halls are actually owned and managed by the community. Each parish is organised into a village hall committee or a community hall committee, and they are volunteers that actually manage those halls. And as things have developed, things have got more complex. Legislation has come in, and there is a need for quite support for people to be a trustee of those halls. But vitally, they mustn't be forgotten, because obviously without them, the community we wouldn't have a community of the future, because they wouldn't be able to meet and they wouldn't be able to bring together other members of their community. There's moves ahead to make community spaces like these into hubs. There's buzzwords about community hubs. They would be where health centres, libraries, learning centres, perhaps internet access, shops come together. That is nothing new, really. That's just communities responding to local needs. I can't really talk about the future without talking about broadband. I don't think this is no longer really a nice to have. It's an essential part of living, and particularly actually where you're isolated from services. And the future looks like healthcare, education, housing and social inclusion. It's all in name will come through that system. It's already happening. It's a utility now. We have had ambitious programmes of rolling out fibre optic, superfast broadband, but we know, those of us, and I'm sure many of you know who live in villages, that we still have gaps in the network, and we still actually have parts of the rural areas that will not be reached by the rollout of the Connecting Cambridgeshire programme. We also have a real varied mobile strength. In fact, I think this is probably worse than the broadband. Some places no signal at all, then some places 4G, but very inconsistent to where you are in rural communities. So we know we need better communities and we need better solutions. There's talk of wireless and satellite, but again, these need to be led from within communities, people coming together to form their own cooperatives to place these into communities. I think you better just help me, Mark, get it. How I've done that. That's it. I spoke about volunteering and social action, the real bit that glues society together. And what I think we should celebrate is the many community leaders, pioneers and other people we've met through this work. And actually from 3 years ago to now, we're meeting new people who work and live in the communities and actually have become part of the programme. The heritage and cultural sector is largely led over this area by volunteers. They run the museums, they organise festivals, they join local history groups, they sustain those assets in the community. And that structure of local engagement, self-organisation, learning and self-help is perhaps what really the pioneers of the Rural Community Council, but also the people we've heard about today, is about the essence of what this area is about. And I think that's quite different to some other areas. I think there's less state management of some of these things in these more isolated areas than any. And definitely in the heritage sector, there wouldn't be some of these museums and people that have joined in our work. But the future, there are issues with this. We have the policy of austerity, and at a local level, this is impacting. Grants to local organisations are drying up or stopping, and you have to become more inventive to find that money to continue. There's also, life is more complex, and there's a need for all types of the way these organisations are managed, for financial models, business planning, and there's a great lack of trustees with the skills to respond. I think there's many organisations, I spoke to a lot of people, and they say, oh, we need new trustees, we need a new person to come forward. And that's, we need to get new people to step forward in the future. There is also ongoing transformation of how people volunteer. I think life is more blended now with work and home life and how people work. A lot of people work from home. We know there's a high percentage of that across rural areas. A lot of people running small businesses. So the trend is for shorter periods of volunteering. They call it slivers of volunteering, and not so much an ongoing commitment. Whereas years ago, I think people did shoulder a lot of commitment. They're not so much now. They're far more wanting to do a few days to support here or a few days there. So there's a more mix of volunteering opportunity. So in the future, we need to look ahead, to look for these new pioneers and the good community leaders that can sustain the communities. If I go back to the structure of the Rural Community Council, it was informed in the first instance by various benefactors. They were largely quite wealthy people that were lived in around Cambridge at the start. But it soon span out, and actually what happened was organisations came together. There was the County Council, educators, WI, NFU, British Legion, all formed up with the Rural Community Council into voluntary committees. And they soon realised that they needed to divide the work of those committees into more specialisms. So health, education, juvenile welfare, older people, they had committees organised, which had all the voluntary groups organised with on. And out of that actually has spun the whole voluntary sector of Cambridgeshire. For example, Age Concern Cambridgeshire, which is now Age UK, that was a committee to start with, then that span off into a very big organisation now. So that's how it's kind of formed itself, community formed these organisations that then went on with that work if it was more specialised. So I think that gives us a great understanding of community and that interconnection of opportunity and the challenges. We know that people like place, they want to work in a place, but we can work through thematic ways as well. But what I do know, and I think this has been proved from this partnership, is that partnership approach is best. I can't think of any work that we do today as Cambridgeshire ACRE that is done alone. Everything is in a partnership, and what is good about that is that we don't just have the sort of statutory agencies, we have local organisations involved with that, and it's that multi-level of mix that I think makes the best partnership approach. So what we have today and what history tells us, and I think, is that Fenland communities adapt. We talk about changing, but I'm not actually sure there's in changing. We've just adapted to the situation. And that we do have people who grow up in the communities who think differently, do something differently, try some new pioneering idea. And that place is alive, where the place is makes really what that idea is they do. We know we do know we need to increase engagement with those that are not likely audiences. And I think through the project we've had, we've engaged very much. You're probably the likely audience, but we have engaged with the likely audience. But we do know there's people that wouldn't come here today and actually could benefit and be part of the programme. So what we're looking for in the future is how we work with the Heritage Lottery Fund to fund new programmes which have perhaps a different audience or a wider audience. So in asking me to look at the communities, I don't think the future, I can't predetermine that. But what I do know, I think it's about our capacity to prepare for that and to mitigate against some of the worst effects. And you'll see on those slides, there were some of the worst things. The flooding, we've heard about that and how communities responded to that. Agricultural changes. And actually the one with the pigs is pig breeding clubs in villages in the war. So they were set up by communities in the war. They also had rabbit breeding clubs. So I think communities will, in the future, we will adapt, and it's about by partnership working that we will all do our best to do that. So thank you.